remember I had some sort of business working. I was really good at origami, the art of folding paper, so I would make little things like airplanes and animals with paper and sell them to the other kids for pocket change. At home, I'd make little book stands out of wood and made plaques out of plaster and sold them to friends, relatives, and neighbors. Once I set up a lemonade stand along with the rest of my inventory in front of my house. For a while, I would get a check in the mail every month for cutting grass at a neighbor's house. I also had my mother's back bathroom up and running as a barber shop when I got to high school. This started with a pair of clippers that I bought from the store to cut my own hair. Before I knew it, people were lined up at my house for a haircut. I charged $2 per cut and would make approximately an extra $40 a week. With all the ventures I was working, the goal was to save $1,000. I never did reach this goal, but I gave it my all. After years of fighting and disagreements, my parents finally divorced when I was around 14 years old. Prior to this, my father was fired from his job with the city for being intoxicated on duty, and we were flat broke. For years, there were never any additional funds, but now there were no funds at all. I can still remember like yesterday when my father's co-workers brought over his last paycheck. His final 2-week check came out to about $60, so the other co-workers had all chipped in to give my mother a helping hand to pay our bills. I watched as she cried for hours about our situation, as well as the extreme generosity of my father's co-workers. At this point, my life has changed forever. Not only was I the man of the house, but now an adult. This event, like most in the past, showed me that it was the lack of money that brought tears, pain, hurt, and misery to the family. From that point on, everything that I did had to be related to making money, making progress, or both. Shortly after my father was fired, he and my mother received their share of his retirement money. This small lump sum lasted about a year, and it was back to the drawing board. My father was nice enough to buy me a car with his portion of the funds. The vehicle was a 1977 Chevy Nova. The car cost $700, and my father made me promise that I would take care of everything such as gas, maintenance, and insurance. I agreed and was on my way. I was 15 at the time and able to get a hardship license because my mother was legally blind. I was very happy to have a vehicle and also very appreciative. I made sure that the car insurance was paid every month. I always had interest in car stereos and amplifiers, so I immediately started to install music in my car with the money from my job. As with all of my ventures, I was teased for trying to create a sound system with limited funds. I soon got extremely good at it, and others wanted me to install their sound systems. I made money doing this, but if money was not available, I would take collateral such as radios, amplifiers, speakers, or equalizers as payment. I would also sell these things to other people. If I had some equipment that I needed to sell, I would install it in my car and ride around with it until someone offered to buy it. This never took very long because I had developed a reputation and would install the equipment for free if they bought it from me. In addition to the entrepreneurial ventures, I also worked for a local grocery store, a newspaper, and a sandwich shop. The last job I worked before turning 18 really changed my life completely. I worked with a summer program called PHS, Programs for Human Services. This program allowed kids of low-income households to have the ability to work in professional settings. We worked in various departments for the city for most of the summer. I worked in the personnel department of City Hall. I spent this summer working side by side with true professionals. I realized several valuable lessons during my time there. The first thing that I realized was that these professionals were ordinary people. They worked jobs that many people had the ability to do, but they also had the qualifications. It was like a light went off in my head, telling me that this wonderful group of individuals were able to reap the benefits of gainful employment by making themselves qualified to do so. That summer I did all types of administrative work, such as answering the phone, making copies, faxing, and filing. The people I worked with were the friendliest people I had ever met, and I loved them. They had lots of admiration for me based on my character and for having an additional job at the time. They would constantly tell me what a great young man I was and what a great job my mother did of raising such a responsible and industrious young man. I can remember them asking if I made straight A's in school. This was actually embarrassing for me because I didn't make straight A's. Although I had been in advanced classes, I rarely cared about grades anymore. I remember making straight A's and B's up until about the 7th grade. This is when I realized that an A or a B wasn't going to change my life in any form or fashion. At least that's what I thought. I had been thinking that making money was much more important than making good grades. I learned that summer that I couldn't have been more wrong. Those grades meant everything. In the personnel department, we would often receive applications for jobs, and I watched how important it was for a person to look good on paper. Some applications came in nice and neat, and others came in folded right out of a person's back pocket. I vowed to never sell myself short again on paper as I had done with my grades. This experience really set the tone for things to come in my life. I always did whatever it took to look good on paper and qualify myself for anything I wanted to do in life. At the end of the summer, PHS had an award ceremony where I was crowned king of the program for that summer. After that, I went back to school for my senior year and averaged all A's and B's. While still a senior in high school, I was making grown-up decisions for myself and my mother, who at the time was divorced. After many painful repairs to keep the Nova running, I decided to do something about it. One day while sitting in English class, I found a 1980 Honda Accord for sale in the paper located about 20 miles away. Immediately after school, I jumped in the car and started my mission. When I arrived in the Nova, which was backfiring at the time, the salesman told me that he didn't want the car, but he admired the fact that a school-aged kid drove all that way to buy his car. When it was time to test drive the Honda, I noticed it was a 5-speed transmission. I was never taught to drive a stick shift, so I had the salesman drive it for me while I watched him. I bought the car that day even though I didn't know how to drive it. I drove home with the car stopping every time I came to a stop sign. That day I taught myself how to drive a stick shift. 2 weeks later, the transmission died in the vehicle. I took it to a local transmission shop who quoted the price to fix it at $400. I only had $300, so I gave it to the owner, who agreed to fix it and wait for me to bring back the last $100. I went back the next week and paid him. He also told me that I had good credit with him and he would help me anytime in the future. My mother and I probably had one of the closest relationships that a young man can have with his mother. We always talked about anything. We would walk to church together, and we were even baptized on the same day. Even when my mother had to whip me, it was almost like we both had to understand that she was just doing what she had to do. I considered us very close friends. When I was 17, my mother decided to have a talk with me. She sat down and told me that my father I had known all my life was not my biological father. She also went on to tell me that my biological father was a man that I had known for years. Words cannot explain how this absolutely crushed me. I realized that I wasn't exactly the person who I thought I was. I was really hurt even more when I thought about all the years of my life feeling like I didn't fit in, and now to know the reason why. Since I never could explain this empty feeling, I never told anyone. The irony was that for years, kids would tell me that I was adopted because my mother looked Caucasian. Now the truth was out. I was also very resentful towards my biological father, since I knew that his family didn't have the financial difficulty that my mother and I had. When my mother and I struggled, we were struggling together, she and I. Now it was like I felt betrayed by my closest friend. It all seemed so very unfair. After years of being an only child, I found out I had a few siblings and a brother who I knew personally from school. I never told anyone at the time. I kept right on as if it were all a bad dream that would be over when I woke up. This affected my relationship with my mother tremendously. We always still communicated, but our relationship suffered for years. My father, who I thought was bringing down the family with all of his drinking, was actually not such a bad guy anymore. I realized that he never had to be there for me at all. I was very hurt, and I carried much of that pain around on my shoulders for years. I tried to keep smiling at everyone, but I was hurting badly. At this time, I was bagging groceries at one of the local grocery stores. After school, I worked there from 4 p.m. in the evening until 10 p.m. at night.